A lot of contracts getting handed out in the NFL to quarterbacks, and we know the next two that are up on the list. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the two teams handle it. One of those guys is Trevor Lawrence. Dan Orlovsky was talking on NFL Live about the extension to Trevor Lawrence.
I mean, there's no way that we could sit here and say he deserves elite money right now. I mean, he's an elite talent, and you would be paying him because you expect him to become an elite quarterback. You would expect him to finally vault into, for the year, in the top 8 quarterback conversation. The last thing I'll say about this is we have to stop saying top 5 quarterback in the NFL. There's way more than 5 really, really, really good ones. It has to become like a top 8 conversation. Trevor hasn't ascended into that just yet. I wouldn't rush and sign if I was Trevor Lawrence.
Wouldn't rush and sign if I was Trevor Lawrence. I don't know if that was a Jags angle or a Trevor Lawrence angle, because I think if they offer you $50-something million a year, you probably jump at it if you're Trevor Lawrence. He is going into year 4 of his rookie contract. They have a 5th-year option that they can pick up, so you technically don't need an extension done for 2 more years. 58 touchdowns and 39 interceptions in 3 years. Last year, a pretty significant dip in overall production. His yards were down. Completion percentage was down. Their winning record was down. He went from 25 touchdowns to 21 touchdowns, 8 interceptions to 14 interceptions. QB rating was down, and QBR was down. He was sacked more times as well, and the Jags were one of the bigger disappointments in the NFL last season in a really bad division, and now they're faced with the conundrum that so many teams are of what the hell do we do with a guy who we think is a franchise quarterback but hasn't really proved it yet.
Well, and Indy upgraded their coach. Steichen had them pretty close last year, and Houston obviously nabbed the best quarterback in their draft with C.J. Stroud. So that division suddenly not as weak.
Yep.
Also blew a pretty good, sizable divisional lead last year and just completely stumbled into the finish line. They were also in the divisional game 2 years ago. And I've not been the biggest Trevor Lawrence. What I kind of thought I'd see from him, I don't feel like I have. And so sometimes we rush to label these guys like as soon as he came onto the scene and replaced Kelly Bryant and won everything, we thought, oh, man, this is Andrew Luck, right?
Won a national title as a freshman.
It's not quite that, but to suggest he shouldn't be paid top money, I'm sorry, Dan Orlovsky. Yeah, that's kind of how this goes. Your alternative is what? Until I actually see a team choose to not pay their, what would you say he is to you? Top 12?
Top 12
for right now.
Yeah.
Before that, you would have definitely had him in the top 10.
After his second year when they won the playoff game and almost beat the Chiefs on the road.
You would have had him absolutely in the top 10. So wherever that is for people, you get paid. Now, I do agree with his point, actually. I don't think he should sign. If he goes out and either gets to the playoff or wins the division and rebounds with his stats, he's going to make more money. So it's just how much does he trust of himself? How much does Jacksonville want kind of a prove-it year? This is year 3 for him, not year 4. His year 1 was about as disastrous a year 1.
We're going no counties, Urban Meyer year.
I mean, in a bit, yes.
Not that bad.
When we find out that Urban Meyer didn't know who Aaron Donald was, and his head coach 9 games in is Darrell Bevell, I think it's fair to say maybe year 1 shouldn't really count. He got the reps, he got the experience, but what are you really placing on him? Year 1 was 2 years ago. They went to the divisional round after a massive home comeback against the Chargers.
He was really good.
And last year they got off to a good start. They just stumbled. And by the way, he's not the only reason that they stumbled. Their wide receiver play was questionable at best. Calvin Ridley's gone. He's in Tennessee now.
Defense wasn't very good.
Well, and they made the wrong pick at number 1. Travon Walker might emerge finally, but Aiden Hutchinson's easily been the better player of those two.
Yeah, not even close.
When you whiff on the number 1 pick with a former number 1 pick, it doesn't help things very much. And oh, by the way, I'm not very high on his coach. I think his coach is starting to kind of be exposed a little bit here. So pretty big year, I think, for the coach. And Lawrence can just up his play and get that contract. To suggest he shouldn't be paid, I mean, come on. Well, I mean, he's accomplished as much in the playoffs as Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I think it's tough, too, because we have this debate every time a new deal gets handed out, and he might be the next up. Maybe it's Tua. And we have this debate of, well, you're way overpaying a guy. How could you possibly give him $50 million? And it's the same debate every time. And does he deserve $50 million a year? The answer is probably no. But how many quarterbacks actually do?
Does Dak?
No. And to the larger point, how many? There is only one example that I can think of, and maybe there's one that I'm missing, in the modern time where a team refused to pay their starting quarterback who was putting up good numbers. Now, we debated, is he top 10, top 15? Where does he fall? He was a starting quarterback who was putting up good numbers. There's only one team that has refused to do it that I can think of, and that was the Washington Commanders.
Well,
the
they
Washington
paid him.
football
They just
team.
paid him on a tag.
They paid him on the tag twice. They refused to give him a long-term extension.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time saying it's a mistake because you have a franchise guy. You should probably lock him up. What have they done at quarterback since they let Kirk Cousins walk in free agency?
They had Taylor Heineke.
They had Taylor Heineke and Alex Smith with one leg, and now we're back drafting it. Maybe Jaden Daniels will be the guy. Maybe not. Then you're back finding another guy. Like, they're the only. Is there another team that we can think of that had a starting quarterback who was putting up decent numbers that said, no, we're not going to pay you. You don't deserve it? We came close with Lamar. He got the deal. Dak got the franchise tag, then signed the extension.
Mm-hmm. And he'll get paid again, probably.
He's going to get paid again.
Because Dallas's record should be good.
You basically are, this is why criticizing these contracts is so funny to me. I understand the fear of, like, how do you build a roster? But it's, if you don't want to pay him, then you're acknowledging you're just starting over. That's the only other option.
Yeah, assuming you have a Brock Purdy in the waiting.
It's not going to happen.
That's a ballsy assumption
Yes.
by a team to do that. I mean, look.
So if you're Jacksonville and you don't want to pay Trevor Lawrence, congratulations, trade him and start all over and tank. And all right, let's see if you can go find the next quarterback because that's your only other option.
And maybe he'll play his way out of getting that contract and this will all work itself out. Some of these teams get stuck in interesting questions and positions. For all I said about Lawrence, and they missed the playoffs, Miami didn't miss the playoffs, but I'm kind of asking, what do you give Tua? Because if you give Tua 200, how do you work that contract where maybe it's not as long-term as it feels, but you still reward your guy who's putting up good numbers and helping you at least get to the playoffs?
Yeah, maybe Mike McDaniels feels like he can be Kyle Shanahan and I can win no matter who my quarterback is, and it's not worth it to give out a big deal.
Or maybe they just keep losing in the wild card and prove they can't win in cold weather.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's also a real thing.
Going to Buffalo or going to Kansas City or going to wherever. Yeah, it's just I don't know. We debate these guys constantly about should we pay them or not pay them, and I understand the consternation. I do. I just if you're going to argue that Trevor Lawrence doesn't deserve to get paid, then you're basically arguing you want them to string this out for 2 more years, which they can do. Where a quarterback contract's going to be 2 years from now, and then are you arguing franchise tag him after that? Are you like? How long are we going to drag this thing out before we decide on Trevor Lawrence? And by the time you decide on Trevor Lawrence, guys are making $50 million a year now. Is that going to be $65, $70 million in 2 to 3 years? So how much money per year are you costing you? I know that the salary cap's going to go up, but I understand.
I don't think this is going to rise as quickly as it has.
The quarterback deals or the salary cap?
The quarterback deals in the sense of it doesn't feel like that long ago that Derek Carr got that deal and everyone went, whoa, what was it, 33?
Mm-hmm.
And now we're at a point where it's 50, and so it's quite literally jumped 20+ million almost on a per year basis for these guys. I know the cap's going up, but eventually I think it's just going to settle. I don't think it's going to rise. Like, in the same span from Derek Carr to where we're at now, I don't know if in that same span going forward, that's what will jump again on a per-year basis. If you told me that slowed and teams said, look, we're paying you the most money far and away, and you're paid top dollar, but it's not 70, it's maybe 58, 59, maybe 60. I think it's going to slow a little bit. But we haven't seen a team yet make the decision to say, you're good, you're not great, we're not paying you. We're moving on.
Yeah, we'll trade you and we're going to start over, or we feel better about your backup.
Right.
It's just been a long time, and I'm in 100% agreement with you on we have to be fair with the way we analyze these guys' careers. And you could look at 3 years and say, well, it's only one playoff appearance and only 1 year statistically that jumps out. You have to take out the first year. You just do. That was one of the worst coaching hires we have ever seen in the modern NFL. We all knew it was going to be a disaster. We all said it was going to be a disaster. And to say, welcome to the NFL #1 overall pick, you now have to do the hardest thing in all of sports, and that is be a starting quarterback right out of the gate for a team that was the worst team in the NFL last year. Oh, by the way, your head coach is going to be chasing co-eds in Columbus after a Thursday night game in Cincinnati.
Yep.
Like his career, if you take out that year, the last 2 years, he's 46 touchdowns and 22 picks, and he's thrown for over 4,000 yards both years. Mm-hmm. Now, he's not putting up Mahomes-type numbers, but the career numbers And the overall product looks a lot different if you just analyze the last 2 years that he's had Peterson and take out the first year with Urban Meyer. He's a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. There's not 12 guys you would take over Trevor Lawrence, and you pay him the money whenever you want to pay him the money because there's no other option, and you're not starting over if you're Jacksonville. Especially as you get ready to build a new stadium, you got to have your franchise quarterback locked up.